Day 201 to 12:59 a.m. Meeting area, White Snake Gang Base, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Mark was wanted by the government. It would be a lie if Mark said that he did not think of this possibility to happen. After all, he did kill some people in Bay City, or at least, turned them into a state that they would rather die instead. Those people were the ones that schemed against May and the rest of his group while he was gone. And, of course, they deserved it. Even so, what Mark did was a crime and should be punishable by law. It was an act of vigilante justice that any country's government looked down upon. However, with Bay City's state of affairs, they could not care less about Mark's acts. It benefited the settlement too. And without the military needing to dirty their hands. However, the help that General Perez and the entire Bay City military settlement received from Mark's group far outweighs those crimes. If not for them, many more would have died when Ouroboros attacked Bay City. In the worst case, the entire Bay City would have been taken over by Ouroboros, or might have been destroyed there and then. And thus, no criminal punishment was given to Mark. Here, however, was completely different. This was not Bay City, and the people ruling it were completely different individuals. Not to mention that they were trying to preserve the past government within those walls. But with all these reasons, Mark had a hunch that it was not all. After all, if it was just because of the criminal acts, the bloodthirsty gangs of this settlement should be wanted for the very same affairs. Yet, they still roam free, terrorizing the settlement's survivors. Is it because of me turning you guys into mutators and evolvers? Mark asked the people in front of him, causing a pause of silence. They had yet to answer, but it was already apparent. And there, Karen told what happened. Before Mark's group left Bay City to transport soldiers and, especially, Professor Sandoval and Amika's family, Mark did one final thing to ensure their survival. On the last night, before they left, Mark turned those who were close to him into mutators, then, their family members into evolvers. And yes, the children in their family were not exceptions to this. Even Karen's son was turned into an evolver. It was all to ensure that they would survive, or in the least, not die too easily. Mark did not request it, but everyone knew that they should hide the story behind it. Well, as much as possible in the least. After all, it would be easy to deduce what happened with very careful thinking. And soon, it was revealed. Those who suddenly turned into mutators and evolvers were connected with Mark in one way or another. It even included General Perez's daughter and her best friend, that was also tied to that person. Envy, jealousy, and regret. These emotions burned in the hearts and minds of those that ignored Mark's existence at that time. And once they relocated here in Corregidor Island, the story circulated the same. And, of course, reached the upper echelon of the current government. How did they react, though? What did they feel? Was it hope? Unfortunately, no. They felt regret and blamed General Perez for letting go of such a valuable person. Of course, General Perez and those that knew Mark personally knew that he was not a person who could be tied forcefully. However, the other government officials were having none of it. And after digging up Mark's deeds, the warrant of arrest was issued, turning Mark into a wanted fugitive. Are they stupid? Mark frowned. What made them sure that I will even go here for them to issue a warrant? Well, it's not like they're wrong. Markran chimed in. You're here. Just who are you siding with here? Mark looked at his friend with half-closed eyes. Returning back to the topic, Mark turned to the others. So, they wanted to arrest me so they can make use of my skills, right? Mark asked, making everyone agree. So, you better not expose yourself to them. Karen spoke. It's not like they can do anything even if I expose myself. Mark shrugged. Yeah, we're not afraid of you getting caught by them, Karen said. It's the bloodbath you will create once that happens because those idiots won't just back off unless you do so. You should know that the ones going to chase you isn't those useless politicians but the police and the soldiers. They were also the ones protecting the settlement, so getting them killed will cause the settlement's defenses to be weakened too. That was the awful truth here. Although the ones high in government positions who wanted to make use of Mark's abilities, the ones that would end up chasing him would be the armed forces that barely knew anything. It looked like Karen was telling Mark not to kill the soldiers. If he wanted to do anything about the problem, go to the source instead. What about you guys? Mark asked. None of you got in trouble because of me, right? There were some hiccups, but nothing major, Karen replied. You should have realized already, but there's only some of us here because the others were already inside. Mark already thought of that. Here, there were only a few of the people Mark knew. For example, Charmaine's sisters were not present. Since Mark gave all of them inhuman abilities, more should have survived. However, he could not sense them nearby. So, they're inside? Mark asked. What for? To make sure you guys don't do anything stupid against them? Not exactly, Karen replied. They were already inside before the arrest warrant came up. Because you just arrived, so you didn't know, but they are gathering mutators and evolvers inside the walls as much as they could. Many were bought by the safety of the walls since their families are also allowed inside if they go. And the catch? Mark knew that it was not that simple. They had to work for the government, making use of their abilities once the government called for it. Markran answered. The question now was, why did the others go inside? Sis. Charmaine chimed in. She decided to enter because she had to take care of several children. Elsa, the older sister of Charmaine, was a teacher even before the apocalypse. She continued working as a teacher even in Bay City, being paid by the military. However, during the calamity, Elsa watched most of her students die, only being capable of saving a few. Those she saved, however, ended up as orphans. Their still living parents were buried by the earthquake. And now, Elsa was taking care of those orphans and decided to enter the walls for their safety. The youngest of the three, Cielo, followed Elsa inside. She did not want to be baggage to Karen and the others, who had a mission given by General Perez to manage the northern slums. The others had similar reasons and followed inside. All of them were taken under the protection of General Perez, however. After all, the inside of the walls might be safe, but it was a mess on the political side. With the others entering inside, however, it became a leash to Karen and the others once the arrest warrant for Mark came up. It was not like those inside were prisoners. They could still go out and meet up from time to time. However, the separation between the tall walls was far enough as a shackle. The messenger we took down might look like a member of the Powder Gang, but he might be someone directly working for the government to monitor us. Karen said, revealing why they did not have any remorse on dispatching the guy. If that messenger ended up as they thought, they might deduce Mark's identity even without evidence. Worse, the military might come and storm the place, searching for Mark. Still, many people saw us entering the gates and being called here, Mark said. The news will still reach them, and they will still suspect it. We know. Markran nodded. In the least, we have some leeway compared to letting them receive it directly. So, should we leave immediately? Mark asked. In the first place, Mark and his group only came here to check on their friends. Now that he knew what happened to them and they were safe, they could leave. Although he was interested in the settlement, it was not worth the trouble staying around and trying to provoke this so-called government. Not so fast, Karen replied. General Perez will come tomorrow. At least, meet him. Those words were accepted by Mark in agreement. This marked the end of the discussion for the problems. There was nothing that they could do with them at this moment unless they wanted to cause trouble. And finally, the actual reunion began. Telling stories of what happened after they separated while binging on snacks and drinks that Mark took out. It had been a while since the people in front of Mark had fun. It was quite unfortunate that even if Miracle was present, she could not join in and eat food. The little girl was not human, after all. It was a pity since Karen and Charmaine wanted to feed her. Well, it was not like they could not, however, it was not food that the two could feed Miracle, but their blood. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The small celebration ended, and everyone went to sleep. Everyone still had a long day ahead tomorrow. Well, Mark did not feel like resting. With Miracle having a shut-eye on his lap, Mark sat on the highest roof of the base of the White Snake Gang. It was the main building in the compound, having 4 stories, despite being made of only wood and metal sheets. It was quite sturdy too and was not swaying with the wind. Apparently, the wood used as the building's foundations were from mutated trees that Karen and Markren procured outside the settlement. Because of its height, it was a perfect place to look around the vicinity. The only thing higher nearby was the walls of the fortress city. That was while Mark could see the surrounding slums nearby. He could not see anything inside the fortress walls from here. "You two won't sleep?" Mark said, sensing 2 people trying to make their way up without alerting other people. Of course, it was Markren and Karen. "Don't underestimate us," Karen blurted out haughtily. "We can spend several days without sleep watching anime, playing games, and reading manga. Don't apply that logic here. Back then, there was barely anything to do. Now, you can't even have proper rest." Mark reasoned before turning to Markren. "And Markren, stop agreeing to her." "What's the problem?" Karen frowned. "We just want to spend more time together." Mark shut up. There was nothing to argue about that. Soon, the 3 sat together, mulling over the past. Mark kept silent, however, thinking about something. "What are you thinking?" Karen said, noticing Mark's silence. "Well, I guess it's time, huh?" Mark said, making the 2 confused. "I just want to say sorry to you too," Mark continued before the 2 could even say anything. "Back in college, I'm too childish to realize. Childish and stupid. I gave you 2 a whole lot of trouble with my shenanigans. And now I remember everything. I sure never gave you 2 a single apology." There was some silence after Mark said those words. Mark was what exactly he said in the past, and, definitely, he gave the 2 quite an amount of trouble. Well, it was not Mark's fault alone. The 2 also have their wrongdoings towards Mark, which caused the already childish guy to lash out more. More importantly. "So, you finally remember everything," Markren said. "Seriously. I'm surprised when you came to my house, not remembering the people I'm talking about all of a sudden, especially when you were around with them just the past day." "Yeah, I remember that," Karen chimed in. "Markren just went telling everyone about you losing memories, you know? We're surprised. I'm sure I remember some of our group going to you and asking you if you remember them. Then returning awkwardly because you're just staring at them like some stranger just went in front of you and came asking if you know them." Mark fell silent. There was that event in the past. "Well, it's my fault." Mark opened his mouth. "I'm having quite a mental breakdown at that time, and none of you seem to have noticed it despite you 2 having a part on why that is happening to me. I just wanted to end it all and succeeded ending it by wiping out my memories. Well, I never realized I did, though. Although I suspected that there are lapses in my memories, I really never tried to remember them. In any case, I gave you 2 a lot trouble," Mark continued. "And that's why I'm apologizing right now." "No, we should also say sorry," Markren replied. "I did realize that you were behaving oddly at that time but ignored it and gave you some trouble too." "Yeah, me too." Karen followed. "It's my fault neglecting you after meeting new friends. Well, who can help it? That guy had the looks." "Huh." Mark sighed while Markren had a troubled look as he stared at Karen. "What? It's already in the past," Karen said. "I had already gotten over the troubles you made after acting up. I had a lot of faults too, so just call it quits. Besides," Karen continued turning to the sky, "you helped us more in many ways during the apocalypse. Small troubles could not be compared to our lives. Rather than us receiving your apology, it's you who should be receiving our thanks." Day 201 to 8:21 a.m. Dining area, White Snake Gang Base, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Early in the morning, well, late for most people, the dining area was bustling with activity. After all, it was time for breakfast. The members of the White Snake Gang already had theirs and left to do their duties. Unlike the usual gangs that lagged around doing nothing and behaving like thugs, the members of the White Snake Gang were the complete opposite. Like soldiers of a private army, they patrol their territory, maintaining security and protecting their people. With the lower members of the gang absent, the dining area was all for the higher members to use. Right now, most people present were pretty much the people Mark knew, along, of course, Mark and his group. The people that Mark did not meet last night were here. Like Carlo's sister and girlfriend, Karen's son, and Markron's girlfriend. They were not that close to Mark like the others, after all. To be exact, they were just Mark's acquaintances. Nonetheless, it seemed that they were happy to see Mark and his family. After all, while Mark was gone, they got close to May and the little girls back in Bay City. It even seemed that Karen's son was hanging around Abigail. Unfortunately, the latter did not care about anything other than her breakfast. Abigail's a cat, after all. A cat should not be disturbed when eating. As for the other people present, they were relatives of the members of the White Snake Gang. Some were wives and children. Others were siblings and parents. While the members of the gang did their job, their relatives helped within the base, doing menial tasks such as cooking and cleaning. However, their attention was currently focused on the unfamiliar guests of the gang leaders. Well, the reason was two of the guests were still wearing masks on their faces, with only their mouths exposed to eat. Well, of course, it was Mark and May. Mark created a pair of blood metal masks for them to wear. After all, Mark was wanted by the government while May was basically a beacon to find Mark easily. Thus, they could not go out without anything to cover their faces. As for the three girls, there would be less attention on them since they were children. Feng Jiruo and Spera, on the other hand, were not familiar to the people of Bay City. The last one, Amihan, could only stay hidden. After all, she was the same as May, who could point out Mark's location, and having a mask would not help on a sylph. That was why even though it was lonely, Amihan could only eat inside the bedroom where Mark's group stayed last night. The breakfast was not much. It was rice congee with pieces of ground meat, although a bit too watered. However, compared to regular rice, the rice used in the congee was dark-colored. Furthermore, it was energizing and filled their stomach heavily. Apparently, the White Snake Gang mixed regular rice and the modified, energy rice, in their breakfast. It was not like Karen and Markron ordered it specifically for today. They do this at least once a week for breakfast, and it just happened to be one of those days. Unfortunately, they could not indulge in eating this way better kind of rice. Although it was available for trade by the military, it was extremely expensive due to limited stock. Even Karen and Markron only managed to procure half a sack for the gang for a sky-high price. When will General Perez arrive? Mark asked as he pushed his now empty bowl. They should arrive pretty soon, Karen replied, wiping the mess around her son's mouth. When the general checks on us, he always goes during mornings since he had other things to do during afternoons. He's a really busy person. And as Karen said those words, Mark felt the familiar emotional fluctuation entering his detection. It was no other than General Perez, who was now likely exiting the gates of the fortress city. The process of entering and exiting the gates seemed to be tedious. General Perez's fluctuation stagnated around the gates for about 10 minutes before going out. Although a bit delayed, General Perez arrived at the base of the White Snake Gang. Once the general entered the meeting area with Karen guiding him, he was, of course, surprised. No one would expect Mark and his group to be present here. Commanding his guards to stay outside, General Perez began the conversation. He soon learned why Mark's group was here, and he could only let out a sigh. You people really are irregulars. General Perez stared at Mark's group. We're here, struggling just to survive, and can only reach 1 or 2 kilometers away from the settlement before reaching the limit without casualties. And you people? Going all the way from the other side of the country with a small group just to visit your friends. It was as if you were just going on a vacation. Mark did not say anything to that. It was true in a sense. Still, the disparity in strength was too vast. Feeling a tug on his sleeve, Mark glanced at May. He knew what she wanted to say and turned to the general. "How's Angeline and Paula?" Mark asked. The general noticed the exchange of glances of Mark and May. He understood that the question came from May instead of Mark. "You're still as silent as possible when around men, huh?" General Perez said in disappointment. Angeline, General Perez's daughter, was really close with May. Together with Paula, Angeline's best and childhood friend, the three of them could be said as the young flowers of Bay City. Because of that, General Perez did not think of May as a stranger. He treated her more like his niece or relative. Unfortunately, May did not seem to have the same thoughts. In any case, General Perez answered the question. "They are fine, and they would be happy to see you too." General Perez sighed. "They should have been with me today, if not for a sudden change in the orders just this early morning." Sudden change in the orders. Markran, who was a bit privy with military routines here in the settlement, could not help but chime in as it felt odd. "What orders, General?" Mark could not help but frown, sensing the uneasiness in the general's mind. "I don't know, but while new orders were implemented for everyone inside, it seemed to be aiming at me." General Perez spoke. The order was for an indefinite emergency lockdown. Only those with official business outside could go out. Even I had some problems at the gates, causing today's delay. Luckily, I did not hide my status as this gang's backer, and it was considered official business. Not to mention I'm not really leaving the settlement, just outside the walls. "Did you know what's the reason for the sudden lockdown?" Karen asked, worried about their friends inside. "Unfortunately, I don't know. We were also surprised by the orders we received the moment we woke up. It may be beyond my network, but something must have happened last night." Something that happened last night. Karen, Markran, and Mark could not help but look at each other. Noticing the reaction of the three, General Perez asked, "Do you three know something?" And with that question, they filled in the general of the things that happened last night. "So, you captured a spy within the gang and dispatched the messenger?" General Perez said in surprise. "No wonder now." General Perez then turned to Mark with a serious face. "Your group should leave already. Those spies report at regular intervals. If they did not receive the report, they should know that something happened to the spy." General Perez sternly warned. "In that case, making my children stay inside while I'm outside stops me from fleeing once things go awry. Those bastards are planning to catch all of us in one swoop." "But Miguel, they don't have any evidence that it was us." Justo, who was also present, spoke. "We also took care of the body discreetly. There are some witnesses, but I'm sure those people will not talk." "With evidence or none did not matter to them," General Perez replied. "If that spy's duty is to solely report if anyone that was possibly Mark happened to appear here, then that was more than enough to catch all of us for helping a wanted man." "Ah, right. There's also that wanted thing." Mark nonchalantly spoke. "I know it's unfair, but greed knows no bounds," General Perez said. "But in a democratic country, the majority vote always wins. So, you all better be going." General Perez continued. "We will be fine if they did not find you here." "Well, it's already too late, though," Mark said to everyone's surprise. What do you mean?" Karen asked, fearing the worst. And despite the others' fear, Mark answered without care. "I mean, the whole compound is already surrounded just after the general arrived. Once any of us go out that door, they will see." Mark pointed at the closed door. Luckily, the meeting room had no windows and only one door. It was to ensure that the plans of the gang would not be seen from outside at any angle. But now, the room became a trap for everyone inside. "Damn it!" General Perez cursed. Soon one of the soldiers that came with General Perez came in panic and informed the general that there were Marine soldiers at the gates of the compound. They were carrying an official search warrant. "Only a search warrant, huh?" Mark voiced out. It seems they were still unsure. "But even if there's no arrest warrant, they can arrest us if there's enough probable cause," General Perez said with a frown. "Although there's still not enough evidence or cause for us to be arrested, we will be if they saw you here." Mark could only shrug. Who would have thought that they would be talking about arrest warrants and stuff in the middle of the apocalypse? It really sounded dumb. However, greed knew no bounds. Laws could be bent by those atop if it would benefit them, especially now. Just go and meet them, Mark said to General Perez, Karen, and Markran. If you delayed, they would suspect you guys more. How about you guys? Karen said, looking at Mark's group. Don't worry, we can handle ourselves, Mark assured them. Although none of them were too convinced about Mark's words, they could only nod. The best they could do was stall for time until Mark's group managed to sneak out. The general, followed by Karen and Markran, came out to meet the Marine soldiers outside their gates. By the looks of it, if the three delayed any further, the soldiers outside would force their way through. General Perez, good morning. A soldier greeted General Perez the moment the gates opened. Unexpectedly, however, it was not just any soldier. It was a Marines commandant and the one who was the most antagonistic towards General Perez. He was Major General Connor Calcedo. That greeting, definitely, was not in good intention. To have a search warrant all of a sudden, you people are itching to get rid of me, are you? General Perez did not return the greeting with pleasantry. Instead, he went to the point. There was no need to wear a mask in front of these people. Be careful of what you are saying, General. General Calcedo smirked. We are only doing our duties. And without waiting for anyone to allow them in. Go inside and start the search. General Calcedo ordered his men. General Perez remained silent. Markran and Karen did the same and let the bastards in. At first, they thought that they would be able to buy some time. But with the Marines commandant present, the thought was rendered impossible. However, search that building first. General Calcedo pointed at the main building of the compound, specifically, the meeting area. The evil grin on the face of the Marines commandant was clear for everyone to see. That command made the three nervous. However, saying anything at this point would only make them seem guilty of something. Without delay, the main building was searched first. The meeting area was locked, making the Marines commandant smile even more. Furthermore, they could hear some rustling inside. General Calcedo was almost laughing as they kicked the door open. The door was busted open, and the soldiers stormed in guns first. And to their shock, the neatly designed meeting area, a room with no windows and only one door, was empty. Day 201 to 10:02 a.m. Meeting area, White Snake Gang Base, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. The situation immediately caused a commotion inside and outside the base of the White Snake Gang. Inside and outside the place, the people went out to watch the scene. Whether it be regular civilians, the members of the gang, or the relatives of the members, they were watching. Of course, the displeasure was evident on the faces of the members. Among the civilians, there were also those who were privy to the situation. Well, even those who know nothing were worried about the gang. Named as a gang they may be, they behaved like one entirely. In fact, there were even some people who received help from the gang, more than equal to the protection fee they pay. It was not wrong to say that there were many civilians that preferred the White Snake Gang to the military. Since many were paying attention to the situation, specifically the general leading the raid, many of them saw General Calcedo's expression as they found the meeting area empty. General Calcedo's face showed shock with a mix of confusion before reddening into a burst of anger. Check the room. Check every nook and cranny. The Marines commandant bellowed in a fit of rage as he turned to a person nearby. You? Where are the people inside? The person the Marines commandant called was the last person to come out of the meeting area. Still, when the man stepped forward, General Calcedo could not help but flinch, seeing the bulky body of the man who was a head taller than him. Justo, who was suddenly called, stepped forward. Initially, he was worried. He was the last to come out of the meeting area before it was locked and saw Mark's nonchalant attitude towards the situation. Now, although bewildered, he changed his attitude, seeing that the room was empty. What do you mean, General? Justo spoke. It was only us with General Perez in that room before you arrived. Of course, That answer would not satisfy the enraged Marines commandant. "General, there's nothing suspicious inside." A soldier that led the search of the meeting area did not take long and returned. "In the first place, the only furniture inside was a set of tables and chairs used in meetings. There was nothing else inside, no hidden compartment or room. As such, the search ended quickly without their intended outcome. FCK. Form a small team and search that room over there." General Calcedo pointed at the supposed guest room of the White Snake Gang. The others searched the whole place. Leaving Husto, General Calcedo accompanied the team that went to the guest room. Unexpectedly, it was not locked, and the room was easily entered. The soldiers hastily entered with General Calcedo. They could not help but cough as the dust accumulated in the room assaulted their faces and mouths. As they relieved themselves of the dust, they saw the neatly organized but dusty room. Yes, dusty. It was as if the room had been untouched for a long while. General Calcdo could not believe what he was seeing. He came here confident of the information he received from the lookout sent after the messenger did not report last night. Something must have happened to the messenger that was assigned to this place. The guy might be an amateur, but he was not someone that would be found out easily. And from the lookout, General Calcedo and his allies knew that the rumored group that arrived here yesterday was somehow inside the White Snake Gang's base. It led to the suspicion that the person the government put in the wanted list actually arrived despite the odds. Yet, despite the supposedly concrete information he received, not even a shadow of the rumored group was here. Not to mention a shadow, not even a footprint in the dust-covered room. The search continued for a while to no avail. General Calcedo and his men did not find anything suspicious at all. Even so, the Marines' commandant was far from giving up, or all the effort and time they spent here would be wasted. It was until a situation happened that forced General Calcedo and his soldiers to leave. The members of the White Snake Gang, the onlookers, and General Perez were relieved and happy to see enemies leave. Still, the members of the gang were quite displeased. As far as search operations always went, the soldiers left the base a mess. They did not find anything but still left a whole lot of things to clean and fix. Even so, there was nothing else to do but fix the things back to how they were before. Well, the fixing would come later. They better hide first. The situation in the White Snake Gang ended. Even so, many were bewildered as they looked at the sky, running in fear. Rumble. Crackle. The weather seemed to be angry for some reason. **************************************************** Day 201 to 10:07 a.m. Northwestern outskirts, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Near the northern beach of the new Corregidor Island, on a tall hill of stone, a group sat down. It was a new location that appeared after the fusion of dimensions. A gigantic tall sea stone rumored to be a shell of a gigantic crustacean buried under the sand. The people atop the hill were no other than Mark's group. They were watching the situation unfold within the base of the White Snake Gang. Although the hill was pretty far from the walls of the slums, it was tall enough to allow them to see a wide area of the North slums, even some areas of the West slums. "You're really thorough, you know," Spera said to Mark. "You even thought of blowing dust from the beach into the room we stayed in the previous night." "Well, it worked, right?" Mark smirked, akin to a playful god. With the group they had various ways of escaping. Mark and May had their movement psychic abilities, allowing them to move people with them. There was also Mark's photokinesis mental crystal, which would allow them to cover themselves with optical camouflage. However, Mark went for the safest option, especially since it allowed them to leave the place without a trace. Not to mention they had to pick up Amihan, who was left in the guest room. Of course, it was Spera's portal. And with it, not only did they manage to escape successfully but made a ploy to mess with the minds of the enemy soldiers. It was to blow dust from the beach inside the room they stayed in. It showed the illusion that the room had been left untouched for a long time. That situation, especially for General Calcedo, would make it as if the information he had was just an illusion. The Marines' commandant was confident with the information he had, but what he found was nothing, making him doubt the information and the integrity of the people that gave it. You're playing mind games, now, huh? Spera murmured, but it was not like she had complaints about it. The reception within the gang was good and it was spoiled because of those soldiers. Gurgur, they're not giving up, are they? May said, seeing that even though the guest room was found as Mark left it, the soldiers were not stopping their search. She could see the situation clearly because of her eyes zooming in. That's expected. Mark shrugged. The leader of those soldiers arrived confidently with the information he had. He must be thinking that we are just hiding somewhere within the base. Well, there were lookouts outside the base, after all. Wait. Sparrow rigidly turned to Mark. So, you know that we are being watched all this time? Yeep. Mark nodded slightly. After that messenger guy died last night, a new one arrived after we all went to sleep. The guy had been watching all morning and made contact with a few people before General Perez arrived. You. Sparrow was speechless. Mark knew everything but did not say anything. Did you plan this to happen? Feng Jiruo asked Mark. Not entirely. Mark smiled. There are possibilities, but it did not mean things will go the way I had in my mind. Besides, it's a perfect opportunity. Opportunity for what? Spera asked. Well, the best reason they were targeting General Perez intently is his current actions. Like searching for the backer of the Powder Gang. Mark explained. Which meant that with those soldiers going to the base of the White Snake Gang, there won't be any immediate reinforcements when something happened to the Powder Gang. Don't tell me, you plan on attacking them. Spera spoke. We will end up exposing ourselves that way. Ah. Mark turned to Spera, scratching his head. You don't know about it. Know about what? Spera asked, and Feng Jiruo was also curious. And without explaining, Mark stretched out his right hand. Several crystals flew out of the Psi crystal, floating and rotating around his wrist. The Wind Manipulation Mental Crystal, Photokinesis Mental Crystal, Lightning Mental Crystal, and lastly, the Stormcaller Mental Crystal. The crystals flew around Mark's wrist as they began to emit intensifying light. Spera and Feng Jiruo could not help but flinch as they felt the heavy wave of magical energy around them. They could not understand what Mark was doing at first, until they raised their heads, looking at the sky. It's slower than before, May said, looking at the dark clouds slowly gathering in the sky. I'm not making it too conspicuous, Mark replied. You see, I'm even gathering it from only one direction. As Mark said, the clouds were gathering from the west, as if a storm was brewing from that direction. Slowly, the clouds gathered ominously as if heavy rain would come. Following the movement of the clouds, the gray clouds moved over the Corregidor military settlement. Many people began to panic as many of them were not prepared for heavy rain, especially the homeless ones. Rumble. The first sound of thunder was heard, signaling the incoming storm. And soon, the center of the dark clouds loomed the settlement. But different from what the people thought, not a single drop of rain fell. Instead, crackle, boom. A sudden bright flash of light blinded everyone's eyes. A thick branch of lightning fell from the sky as if a god angrily threw it towards the mortals. It was just a flash in a millisecond, however, all that saw it knew that the lightning struck the ground. Ah, soon, the screams ensued. Boom, crackle, rumble. The lightning strikes hit the ground several more times in various places of the settlement. As the people fled, none of them noticed that compared to the scattered lightning, more hit a particular place in the western slums. Hit by lightning several times, the place soon caught fire. It was the base of the Powder Gang, with its members inside either dead or paralyzed after being hit by lightning several times. Many people started fleeing, and even the soldiers searching the base of the White Snake Gang were alarmed. The search was cancelled as the news of the fire in the base of the Powder Gang reached the soldiers. The soldiers led by the Marines commandant left the place in a hurry, cursing his luck and the information given to him. Even so, he needed to respond to the situation, even more so because his backer would be pissed by the situation. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The storm passed as quickly as it came. However, the situation was far from over. The base of the powder gang was slowly burning to ashes, along with its members, dead or paralyzed, trapped inside. Karen, Markran, General Perez, and Husto waited in the meeting area. They were thinking that Mark and his group would return after some time. Unfortunately, what they found was a letter left under the table. By the looks of it, Mark and his group would not be returning. After all, they only came to check the situation of their friends and it was already fulfilled. Day 201 to 12:23 p.m. Administrative Office, Safe Zone, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. The strange thunderstorm passed to everyone's relief. Still, the wariness and fear became deeply engraved in the hearts of those that experienced it. There were the infected, the earthquake that changed the world, the robots from space, and now, this unexplainable weather phenomenon. No one would know what could happen next in this world now far from what people knew. Would humanity last long if these kinds of things continued to happen? Well, although the dark clouds that loomed over the sky a few minutes ago had dispersed, the calamity was far from over. At the west slums, rising towards the sky, was a pillar of thick, black smoke. The flames continued to burn as they engulfed the entire base of the powder gang. The compound made of plywood, cloth, and plastic would not be able to stop the fire until everything burned to ashes. Along with the members of powder gang that were trapped inside it. Whether it be the members who were just regular humans, evolvers, and even mutators, all those inside were unable to escape. Inside the safe zone, the city enclosed by the fortress walls, many people were watching the pillar of smoke. It included people from the government, the military, and, of course, the backers of the powder gang. Inside one of the office rooms in the administrative building, a man seething in anger sat on his chair while looking through the window. "What is the situation there?" The man spoke to the radio on his office table. His voice was shaking, barely managing to contain his calm. "It is hard to say, Chairman." A familiar voice replied from the radio. "But the casualties can be estimated. And it is not a good piece of news." "Just report," the man said, rubbing his forehead. That's." The voice from the radio hesitated before a deep breath was barely heard. "From the leaders to the middle members of the gang, all of them are inside the burning compound. Only the lower members who were tasked to do their jobs around the slums are fine." "So, are you saying that everyone but the useless ones is dead?" The chairman spoke, sounding stern. "Why, unfortunately, it is hard to say, Chairman." The man on the radio replied. "There might be some still alive but trapped inside, but there is no way to confirm. The whole base is burning, and it is definitely suicide to jump inside. We might have been able to save anyone if we managed to respond early, but even the earliest to come, General Calcedo and his men, are already late." "Okay, this is it for now." The chairman spoke to the radio. "Report to me once something important happened." "Yes, Chairman." And there, the radio went silent. F***CK. The chairman cursed his luck. Because of this disaster, everything he built and his future plans turned to ashes, literally. Of all places, why was it the base of the powder gang? There were many places where the lightning strikes hit, but only the base of the gang caught on fire. Yes, the man called Chairman, currently known as Pedro Cacahuyan, 66, was the secret backer of the powder gang. He was a rich entrepreneur in the field of medicine business. He owned an entire chain of pharmacies nationwide. Known as a great man, he had several foundations under his name. Not to mention the news of him donating to other foundations to help the poor and the sick. At the moment, he was working with the remains of the Philippine government to manage the settlement, being the medicine distributor for the military. Who would have known that under this guise lay a corrupt individual? A man who led the distribution of illegal drugs in the shadows. "Crowell." The chairman called out, even though there was no one but him inside and outside his office. Hearing no reply, the chairman spoke once more. "I know you are here." "Ha." A sigh was heard inside the supposedly empty office. It was then that a crow appeared out of nowhere, flying around the ceiling before landing to the side of the wall. Once the crow landed, however, it was not a bird that stood there but a man wearing a black hooded robe that covered his face. "What do you need from me?" the hooded man, Crowell, asked. From his voice, it sounded like he was young, around his early 20s. "I'm pretty sure you know what is happening," the chairman said with a frown. "What are we supposed to do now?" To the question that was asked back to him, Crowell only shrugged. "Why are you asking me? I'm only your supplier, that's the extent of our contract. Whatever you do to the product, whatever happened to it, or whatever your plan is had nothing to do with me." The chairman frowned even more. He was already in an extremely foul mood, and now, the man in front of him was not helping. However, he decided to hold his anger inside. He might be able to cuss on anyone in the settlement, including the president if he was not holding onto his current image. Anyone but Crowell. Crowell had a huge organization behind him and his only lifeline. He could lose anything but not his connection to Crowell. Anyway, Crowell spoke all of a sudden. "Who did your men piss off this time?" The question came out of nowhere, making the chairman livid. "What did you say?" the chairman asked Crowell. "I said, who did your men piss off this time?" Crowell repeated. However, the chairman was still confused and could not answer the question. Seeing that the old chairman was confused, Crowell let out another sigh and explained. "What happened to your powder gang is not just some natural phenomenon," Crowell explained. "Someone powerful attacked them. A powerful being capable of controlling the weather. That's why I'm asking you, who did your men angered to receive such a retaliation?" Confusion and shock. That was what the chairman felt after hearing the words from Crowell. It was unbelievable that such a terrifying event was made by someone and not just some strange coincidence. Without minding the chairman's expression, Crowell continued to speak. "I already warned you before. The current Earth is different from the Earth in the past. The dimensional wall between the mortal world and the spiritual world was gone. Both dimensions are already fused. That is why hidden masters and powerful beings are beginning to appear. Be careful on who you are trying to make enemies of." "That's impossible." The chairman finally snapped and replied in agitation as he stood up from his chair. "Aside from the gangs in the slums, my men never clashed with anyone. And so far, the only enemy we had with status is that pesky Perez. And he's a common enemy with many of us. So far since he arrived, nothing like this happened." As he heard those agitated words from the chairman, Crowell could not help but tap his concealed chin. "Now that you mentioned General Perez, I think I heard about you and your allies planning something last night. Didn't that plan involve someone else?" That question made the chairman froze. Crowell was right. Everything was going the same until today when they planned something different. A factor that they did not think of initially. After all the stories about that guy sounded like fairy tales. "That can't be." The chairman slowly sat down on his seat. "Are you saying that this is caused by that wanted man?" I don't know," Crowell replied, shaking his head and gesturing with empty hands. "I'm just speculating. However, it's only the odd factor so far." As he heard the speculations from Crowell, the chairman immediately grabbed the radio. He contacted his men near the burning base of the powder gang and inquired the report from General Calcedo, who was on site. Since the plan had just commenced a couple of hours ago, he and his allies had yet to receive the report of the result of the plan. And after hearing the report from the frustrated Marines' commandant's mouth, the chairman slumped on his chair. The plan did not yield any result. The chairman spoke. "There's no trace of the target despite the lookouts saying otherwise." "Then, you people are screwed, in that case," Crowell said with a shrug. "You guys are blinded by greed, neglecting the other factors. But those are nothing but rumors. All the information about him sounds exaggerated, unbelievable and no basis," the chairman emotionally said as he slumped down on his table, holding his head in agitation. "Huh? Seriously?" Crowell looked at his client with a troubled tone in his voice. "Rumors, folklore, legends. All might sound unbelievable, but none of them start without a basis. Seriously, it seemed that you already forgot how you got into a mess in the past. It all started with a rumor until your shady deals were exposed and you had to change persona to keep your freedom. The chairman fell silent. All the ridiculousness of the report about the target was something none of them believed to be true. Now that this happened, it was better to reconsider their plans in the future. Even more so since the powder gang he supported in the shadows was now destroyed. After a moment of silence, the chairman stood up. "Where are you going now?" Crowell asked. "I need to gather my allies and discuss the situation," the chairman replied and turned to Crowell. "As for our deal, stop the supply of drugs for now." "It's fine with me," Crowell replied. "But what are you going to do with the excess points you have from the deal?" "I'm telling you that I can't return it." The chairman stopped for a bit to think and replied. "Are those points enough to buy information from you?" "It depends on what information," Crowell replied. "Then, what about information about the wanted man?" the chairman asked. "Well, it won't be enough," Crowell replied negatively. "We're talking about a possibly powerful being here. The puny excess points you have don't weigh as much as the danger of investigating such a being." The chairman could not help but frown. However, he understood that Crowell would not lie about prices to a client. It was a rule within Crowell's organization. "Then, how about information about the people close to that man in this settlement? I believe that is enough." The chairman changed his target. Crowell thought for a bit and nodded. "It should be enough." "Is that order final?" "There's nothing I can do. Just draw the contract." The chairman replied decisively. And there, Crowell began to recite an incantation, causing a small magic circle to appear in front of him, summoning a magical owl. Of course, it was a wise owl of the merchants of the Crystallis Notitia Cetus. With the wise owl as a witness, the new contract was drafted between the merchant and the client. And without further ado, Crowell turned into a crow, disappearing from the room to fulfill his end of the deal. On the other hand, the chairman went on his way to gather his allies for a meeting. All of this happened discreetly with only the merchant and the client in the know. For now, the chairman's plans were put into a defensive stance. Before, he planned to slowly put the settlement under his control through the use of the illegal drug trade. Now knowing that they might have taken more than they could chew, he was thinking of plans to preserve his safety. Unfortunately, greed knows no bounds. Wanting to get a hold of power, there were those who would resort to drastic measures. And now, the situation within the settlement was turning into a direction that no one expected. Day 202 to 9:21 a.m. Marivel's Bay, village of Sissamon, municipality of Marivel's, province of Baton. The Bay of Marivel's. Far different from what it looked like in the past, it was now smaller as the land encompassed its boundaries. It was about 8 kilometers away northwest of Corregidor Island in the past. Now, it was only around 6 kilometers away from the northwestern beach of Corregidor Island. With the Mount San Miguel and Sissamon Lighthouse at the southmost beach of the village, it was a pretty popular tourist spot for those who wanted a scenic view of Marivel's Bay and Corregidor Island further away. Of course, everything was now abandoned. The foundation of the lighthouse managed to survive the earthquake, but more than 3/4 of the structure fell and got buried beneath the new land. Right now, however, this abandoned place was inhabited by a large metallic cube. It was no other than the mini-cube, the floating vessel of the humanoid chimera, Chimetris, and the elder succubus, Ilia. Well, the mini-cube just stayed here for no more than a day so far, but as it seemed, the group they were waiting for returned too early somehow. And now, using the destroyed base of the lighthouse, a campsite was erected for the group to rest in. Since Mark's group returned late at night yesterday, the discussion was rescheduled for the next morning. Apparently, they watched the entire commotion in the settlement, which did not calm down even before they left. Surely, Mark's deed was not something that could be easily forgotten by those that witnessed it, not to mention that the fire from the burning base of the powder gang had yet to burn out completely. "You all returned too early. Did something go wrong?" Ilya asked Mark and his group as they settled down to their seats. The one to answer was not Mark, however. The remnants of this country's government are so messed up, Spera spoke. They had Mark on their wanted list and are proactively hunting him. With Spera's words as the start, Ilya and Shemetris heard the details from Mark. Whoa! Are those people idiots? That was Ilya's reaction. People in the past are considered barbarians compared to modern humans. Still, they are way better in returning favors. Shemetris voiced his disappointment. In Bay City, Mark saved the settlement from the hands of Ouroboros. There were casualties beforehand, especially those sacrificed to revive the flame demon, Garvlam, which could not be helped. However, things would have gone worse if not for Mark's interference. While it might just be in Bay City, it was still a part of the remnants of this country, not to mention governed by the military, and it was under the government. Mark did a good thing for them, only to be turned into a wanted criminal for killing a few politicians that schemed against his family. Yes, vigilante justice was shunned by the law, but that was the past. The remnants of the government were even letting drug addicts rule a portion of their territory. Yet, they were chasing after the man that saved their asses. And it was all because of greed for something they did not have. The greed for the ability to turn people into mutators and evolvers without any consequences. What are the plans now? Ilya asked. Are we heading south already? At the question, Mark glanced at May. Not yet, Mark answered. We'll stay here for today to cool down the situation. Then, we will sneak inside the fortress walls tonight. You and May? Ilya asked, looking at the two. What for? We'll just meet some people, Mark replied. It won't take that long, so everyone should just stay here. Everyone understood Mark's words, even the little girls. Since Mark and May would need to sneak inside a heavily guarded place, they could not come. As for why Mark and May would go infiltrate the place, it was for personal reasons. Although they did manage to meet Mark's friends in the White Snake Gang and learn about the situation of the others, there were still some people they wanted to meet. For May, it was Angeline and Paula. They were her first true friends, after all. And for Mark, it was actually the wife of General Perez, Angelis. He did not intend to meet her personally but just see her current state. Mark did not know why he wanted to check, but it may be because she resembled Fried's mother. There was no need to mention that Angelis should have a direct connection with Fried's ancestry. With these plans in mind, Mark's group spent the day around the ruins of the lighthouse. They got attacked a few times by either the infected or feral evolved animals, but with the whole group together, these threats did not even stand a chance. Day 202 to 8:11 p.m. Marivel's Bay, Village of Sissamon, Municipality of Marivel's, Province of Baton. Time sure passed fast while idling around. It was already a couple of hours past sunset. After Mark and his group ate their dinner, it was time for Mark and May to depart. I'll leave the girls to you two, all right? Mark said to Spera and Feng Jiruo. There is no need to worry. Feng Jiruo nodded. Yeah, just go. Spera chimed in, and returned quickly. You three behave while we are gone, all right? May said to the three girls, making Mark shrug at the side. There was no need to tell the three to behave. The most childish one, Miracle, was not even as willful as human children. And there, the two left while being watched by the rest of the group. Seriously, why won't they leave their children to me? Ilya complained while watching Mark and May fly away. And to Ilya's complaint, Spera replied, You should look at yourself first before asking. That was right. There was no way that Mark and May would leave their daughters to a succubus. What kinds of odd behaviors would they learn if they were left under a lusty being's care? Leaving the campsite at the ruined lighthouse, Mark and May flew hidden by the darkness of the night sky. Since it was a cloudless night, the two flew high as they possibly could. Gerger, do you know where they are staying? May asked Mark as they flew over the waters of western Manila Bay. Of course, May could not help but ask. Their conversation with General Perez was cut off too short. It was barely even a conversation. It's at the northwest side near the northern gates, Mark replied. General Perez is renting a whole building for his family and loyal subordinates. Karen and Markran said that the rent gets more expensive the closer it is to the center of the safe zone. Since General Perez doesn't have much to offer, they could only get a building near the walls. It was a piece of information that Mark learned from Karen and Markran when they talked the other night on the roof of the base of the White Snake Gang. After they apologized for the past events, they talked about several things that night. It included why the gang was named as it was. The name was definitely not in Karen nor Markran's taste from what Mark remembered. In any case, Mark learned the general area of where General Perez and his entourage stayed. Rent. May murmured. It's definitely not paid with money. Of course not. Mark nodded. The payment varied from supplies to materials from evolved animals, or mutated infected. Everything is converted to credits, though. They started using those materials to make weapons and armor sold at the trading area near the gates. From what I know, General Perez actually used the research papers I brought from Infanta as initial payment. Aren't they gathering mutators and evolvers inside? May asked as she thought of something. What if those people can't pay the rent? Well, I don't know about that. Mark shook his head. Maybe they have some free space for those people but not enough to live comfortably. Or else, renting houses and buildings won't have meaning. Mark could only make an assumption as he did not have any information to answer May's question. However, what he thought was actually on point. The enticement of the safe zone was not exactly the dwellings but the safety behind the walls. Thus, most people inside did not mind the small rooms they were given initially as they could move once they had enough to pay the rent somewhere else. Flying across the sky, Mark and May reached the sky above the safe zone rather quickly. The only things left for them to do were to find a secluded place and the right timing to fly down. It was easy to find a good place to land. After all, they were looking from the sky. The timing also came fast. The patrols were doing their rounds and left the vicinity of the area. With that, Mark and May held hands and dove down to the ground, and once they reached a height where they could be seen by the guards atop the walls, Mark used his shadow mist movement to turn into a surge of black mist with May. The two landed safely without getting any unwanted attention. It was rather nerve-wracking since Mark's shadow mist movement had limited distance. The two of them repeatedly appeared and disappeared before landing. Mark could use the photokinesis mental crystal to use optical camouflage, but he went against it. Using the crystals emit quite a ripple of magical energy into the surroundings compared to using their own abilities. Since they were sneaking into an unfamiliar place, who would know if someone with high enough magical sense was present inside? Landing safely, the two hid their wings. It was unneeded and would only serve as a hindrance while moving behind buildings and alleys. And from here, Mark would use his abilities as an empath to search for the right location. With Mark's abilities, it only took a second. The familiar emotional fluctuations of people they knew were just a couple of buildings away. Mark and May began moving. With Mark's empath abilities serving as a radar, it was easy to bypass the patrols roaming around the streets. Soon, the two stood behind a walled compound. Mark wondered if everyone inside the compound was with General Perez since the building where the emotional fluctuations were coming from was inside. Nodding to May as a signal, the two of them jumped over the wall and went straight to the tallest building inside. The building was not one built vertically. It was a 3-floor structure built horizontally like a commercial apartment building. However, now that they were close, Mark could not help but frown. Gerger, is something wrong? May noticed the sudden change in Mark's demeanor. I didn't realize since I'm only paying attention to the fluctuation from General Perez. Angeline and Paula aren't here. Elsa is not here either, Mark explained. More importantly, everyone is agitated. May could not help but worry after hearing Mark's words. Those were definitely not good signs. Let's go, Mark said as he held May's right hand. The two of them then turned into a surge of black mist that crept up the walls of the building into a particular room. Dad, what are we going to do? Are we not going already? We should start searching. Where are we going to search then? It's already past the night curfew. Do you all want to get caught? Inside the room, a tense discussion was ongoing. Angry, worried, and panicked voices overlapped one another. Damn it. Just why in the world is this happening? General Perez's weak voice could be barely heard among the noise. However, he was clearly worried sick about something. Miguel. Dear. A weak voice of a woman entered the general's ear as his wife sat beside him with a worried face. Bang. The noise was suddenly overlapped by the loud sound of someone punching the wall. *T. There, the general's eldest son, Raphael, stood with his blood-covered hands. Just where the hell did those three go to? All of a sudden, the noise died down with a loud bang. It was when everyone realized that the people inside the room increased by 2. Day 202 to 8:51 p.m., Northwest Military Compound, Safe Zone, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Slumped on his chair at the building's meeting area on the 3rd floor, General Perez was at a loss. It was not only him. All the people present were in a similar state. Nonetheless, General Perez and his family were in the worst state of mind, along with 2 more people. One was Cielo, and the other was Pauline. What happened? Last night, when everyone less expected it, 3 people disappeared from the compound they were in. One who was missing was Angeline, the only daughter of General Perez. She went missing with her childhood friend, Paula, Pauline's daughter, and Elsa, Cielo's eldest sister. No one knew how or when it exactly happened. It was only put to everyone's attention after Cielo started freaking out last night. The rooms of the building General Perez rented were limited. Because of this, everyone was obligated to share rooms. In the case of the 3 missing women, they were sharing the same room together with Cielo. Last night, however, Cielo went out a bit to go to the toilet before midnight. It took her a little while since there were no proper water facilities installed in this place and the outhouses were outside the building. Once Cielo returned to the room, the other 3 were already gone. At first, she thought they went out for a bit since they were still chatting when she left. It was not new since they would sometimes gaze at the stars to try and forget how chaotic the current world was, even for a moment. Cielo could not make herself fall asleep and waited. However, the 3 never returned. It made Cielo extremely suspicious. She began knocking from room to room and asking anyone she came across if they saw her sister or the other 2. But no one saw them. With no result to her search, Cielo went straight to General Perez. Her heart was filled with nervousness. Knowing that his daughter was suspiciously missing, General Perez immediately conducted a search within the compound. The search continued until the following day. However, not a single clue was found. Nonetheless, they knew they were very likely to be kidnapped. It was shameful to admit. 3 women vanished without a trace from their compound. A place where soldiers lived and somewhere supposedly secure. General Perez wanted to conduct a search outside the compound and around the safe zone. Even the tiniest clue of where the 3 were brought to or who could possibly be the mastermind would help. Unfortunately, the emergency lockdown from yesterday was yet to be lifted. No one was allowed outside their homes or out of the gates without official business. General Perez tried to lead a group of his men to personally lead the search, but they were blocked by other soldiers under the direct command of the government. Although it was not wrong to say that General Perez and his soldiers were also under the government, they were currently on the opposition's side. That was why the security of the safe zone was handled by another branch of the Philippine Armed Forces, and they were receiving direct orders from the government. And due to these circumstances, General Perez was not as free to roam the safe zone as he pleased, not to mention other people he was allied with. It was a clear ploy against him and his allies, and probably a way to stop him from searching for his daughter. If this was the case, it was very likely that the one that took his daughter and her friends was someone high up the top brass. General Perez was on edge. Of course, General Perez could consider rebelling against the current government. However, no matter how his daughter could be in danger, he could not push himself to start a rebellion. Doing so would cause a bloodbath. A civil war within the fortress walls of the safe zone. General Perez would not mind the deaths of the enemies as much. However, he could not lead his men to their deaths on an uncertain endeavor. The decisions General Perez would take would not only affect his or his family's lives. It would include the lives of everyone following him and their loved ones. Moreover, while they could not take direct action, the current government's forces were far superior in comparison to General Perez and his allies. The stakes were higher for General Perez and his allies to lose if a direct confrontation was to happen. And because everyone understood this fact, no one knew what to do. Furthermore, without any claims or messages, no one knew why the three girls were kidnapped all of a sudden. In the worst case, they could be used to put a collar on General Perez. Everyone stormed their brains and proposed ideas. However, none were plausible at the current state of things. General Perez and his faction were backed into a corner because of this incident. In the first place, if they wanted to save the three girls, they needed to find where they were being held at. But they could not do any searching, making everything else dangerous to do. And during the time they were backed into a wall of despair, a rather familiar voice echoed in the room. "General, what happened?" Everyone's attention was immediately thrown towards the windows of the meeting area. It was not surprising that their first action was to take their weapons out of their holsters and aim at the sudden intruders. Many of them were rather surprised, however. Two people appeared out of nowhere as if they went in from outside the window. However, there was no sound or any hint that they entered. They just appeared out of thin air. However, even though the room was only lighted by a few oil lamps, General Perez gazed at the intruders and immediately recognized the male one. "Put down your weapons," General Perez ordered everyone as he stood up from his chair. "But, General," a soldier hesitated, which was reasonable due to the sudden appearance of the intruders. "I won't repeat what I said," General Perez warned his men before turning to the intruders, approaching them. Of course, General Perez would recognize the intruders. In the first place, there were only a group of people that General Perez knew to possibly have the ability to just appear like this. Seeing the general's reaction, Mark nodded to May, and the two removed the masks they were wearing. Having their appearance seen now did not matter anymore. Besides, Mark understood that everyone in this room was, without a doubt, a loyal ally of General Perez. And to say, most of the people here recognized the two. It was impossible not to recognize May, who was well known during her stay in Bay City. There was also her partner, Mark, who just appeared one day, saving Bay City from the threats several times. In this dimly lit room, it was as if everyone suddenly saw the light. If they could not do something, these two possibly could. Bro. Cielo saw hope at Mark's sudden arrival. She could not help but rush to him, holding his hands. "My sister, she's missing. We don't know what to do." Cielo began to cry. She seemed to be holding it until now, keeping a tough front and searching for answers. She could not cry if she wanted to find a way to find her sister. But now, her effort to hide it crumbled. Cielo was really worried. Well, who would not? Mark could not help but flinch a little. Cielo called him bro because both her older sisters did. Nonetheless, he was not that close to Cielo, and they were just more or less acquaintances. Getting his hand being held like this by Cielo while crying was kind of uncomfortable. However, he understood her worries, so he did not show any negative reactions. Instead, Mark turned to General Perez. "I'm sorry." The general apologized, despite being in front of everyone. "We should be protecting your friends here, and yet, Elsa was kidnapped under our noses." Mark stared at General Perez silently. This general still apologized, even though he was similarly a victim in this event. From the general, Mark's eyes fell on Pauline. Mark met this woman a few times in Bay City since she was Paula's mother. However, Mark did not proactively interact with her. After all, this woman had the same ability as her daughter, the ability to see lies. That mother and daughter sure were tricky people to deal with. Pauline also stared at Mark. She was not saying anything, but her eyes were particularly begging. And lastly, Mark's eyes fell on Angelis, the wife of General Perez. Seeing her appearance, Mark's mood became a bit lighter. After waking up from her coma, It seemed that she was recovered steadily. She looked healthy now. Well, physically, at least. She was definitely mentally exhausted due to the kidnapping of her daughter. From here, Mark decided to hear the details of everything that happened. Not only about the kidnapping but also some topics that Mark wanted to hear during his meeting with General Perez at the base of the White Snake Gang. It included the current structure of the so-called government and the enemies of General Perez. And after hearing enough, Mark posed a question towards General Perez. It was a question that made the room deadly still and filled with silence. "General, do you want to lead this settlement?" It was a question that no one expected. No, rather than a question, it was a proposition. Mark was proposing for General Perez to become the leader of the Corregidor military settlement. The general could not help but stare at Mark. Unfortunately, Mark did not seem to be joking. However, General Perez could not answer such a question all of a sudden. Yes, he had been the leader of Bay City military settlement. However, that and this were completely different things. In Bay City, he was the leader since the apocalypse started. Everyone already saw him as the leader as they arrived, and it continued until its collapse. Here, it was different. If the current leadership of the settlement was suddenly handed unto someone else, loyalty and support would be a major issue. After all, not everyone here came from Bay City. Most of the population in this settlement either the original survivors or came from a different military settlement. There would likely be a lot of opposition and power struggle. Everyone around could not blame the general's silence. It was too much of responsibility even for him to lead this settlement. But to the general's silence, Mark pushed on. "I can possibly save your daughter and without shedding too much blood. But what after that? This could happen again. And at that time, I will not be here. Things like this will happen again and again. Not only to your loved ones but also to those people connected to me. I left their protection to you because I know you can be trusted, and you won't be able to protect all if the root of the problem isn't cut." And the root of the problem was the remnants of the government leading this settlement. Once Mark cut off the root, it was likely for this settlement to become leaderless. Unfortunately, General Perez was still hesitating, and here, Mark spoke his true intentions. "Well, you didn't have to think deeply. Whether you answer yes or no, I already planned to cut the roots, anyway." General Perez sure was speechless. It meant that his answer did not really matter at all. But that was the problem. If he said no, Mark would leave the settlement leaderless. If no one was to claim it immediately, various powers would try to take it, even by force. At that time, even if General Perez wanted it or not, a war for leadership would happen, causing an unreasonable number of lives to be sacrificed in order to gain control of this place. And no matter what his answer was, General Perez and his faction would likely get dragged into this. Considering that while General Perez and his faction could not contend with the government, they would likely win against other factions here in Corregidor military settlement. He had Mark's friends and people with him, who were all evolvers and mutators. In the end, while more blood was shed, General Perez would end up its leader. "You." General Perez sighed. "You're not really giving me a choice in this matter, are you? You're just warning me of what's going to happen." And to that, Mark smirked. "Yep. Well, it's not absolute. Mishaps can happen here and there, like right now. In any case, you don't have a choice. The only choice you have is whether you are going to take the easy route or the hard route." At this point, there was no point in thinking. The only option was to accept it. Finally, the weeding of the Corregidor military settlement began, instigated by the embodiment of chaos. Day 202 to 11:24 p.m., Presidential Mansion, Central Area, Safe Zone, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. It was almost half an hour before midnight. Usually, because of the rules of the Safe Zone, the night should be as silent and peaceful as possible. Tonight was different from others, however. The Presidential Mansion. It was the most secure place in the entire settlement. Not only was the mansion the center of the safe zone, its facilities prioritized safety instead of aesthetics. All types of security measures were installed around the mansion. From soldier-manned watchtowers to security cameras, it was not hard to think that the people that made this were highly paranoid. Tonight, even though it was already near midnight, the mansion was bustling with activity, and the tension could be perceived by everyone inside. Inside the presidential office, the highest authorities of the settlement gathered. Of course, at the center of it all was the current president, Roderick Deroa. Standing in front of the window behind his seat, he was watching the night sky. It's almost midnight. Miguel Perez should be really anxious by now. President Roderick spoke before turning towards the people behind him. How are his movements? The president's eyes fell on a man who had just arrived, wearing some sort of military uniform. It was different from those known for the soldiers of this country to wear. Instead of either greenish or grayish military camouflage, he wore a completely black suit paired with a black mask to cover his face. General Perez had yet to make any forceful movements, although it was suspicious that the soldiers following him were gathering inside their compound. It looks like he finally decided. President Roderick nodded before his eyes locked onto one of the people inside the room. Manuel, is our troops ready to skirmish? The military chief of staff, Major General Manuel Bautista, replied to the president's question. Our soldiers are stationed inside and outside the presidential mansion and within the surrounding buildings. We have the geographical advantage once a skirmish happens. Good. President Roderick turned towards the window once more. Everything is all going according to plan. All that is left is for our target to appear. The chief of staff stepped back to his position. His face, however, had a complicated expression. 3 women were kidnapped under the president's orders. It was an intolerable act considering they were supposed to be the pillars protecting their citizens. Yet, because some people became an eyesore for those in positions, they resorted to these criminal acts. Unfortunately, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces by law. Even the chief of staff had to follow the president's orders. Even though the orders went against the way of justice, they wanted to follow. Many soldiers hated the government and the way it managed the country. Behind every good thing, there were a couple more bad things within the government. However, not all soldiers had the bravery to go against the government and follow their own sense of justice. Not everyone was like General Perez and his followers. General Perez was brave enough to face the people on top and follow his ideals. Thus, he was seen as an eyesore. Unfortunately for those that hated General Perez, taking him out was not an easy thing to do. The Philippines was a democratic country. The common populace might not have the power alone, but the Filipino people were known to bond together against injustice. There were already 3 times where the populace caused the president to step down from their position during the country's history of democracy. The power of the masses in this country was not something easy to abolish. And currently, General Perez was the one who had the support of the masses at this time. If he was suddenly assassinated, it would be easy to pinpoint the perpetrators. It was no secret that the general was clashing with the current government, after all. Furthermore, as they try to re-establish the government and its laws, it would be harder to start things against the existing rules. And it was the reason why they had to kidnap the general's daughter. A simple kidnapping could be blamed on anyone. Furthermore, there was no concrete evidence on who did it. However, the only goal of this was to rile up the general, to force him to take up arms and go head-to-head with the government. If General Perez did that, he would be legally charged with rebellion. Even with the support of the people, a criminal was a criminal. Even if the people still wanted to support General Perez, many of them would hesitate to do so. And now, it seemed that General Perez began to gather his troops and allies. A bloody encounter this time would be inevitable. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Swoosh. Inside the very same mansion, a surge of black mist lurked along the hallways. The black mist then turned into a corner before turning into a humanoid being. Of course, that surge of black mist was no one else but Mark. After giving General Perez the proposal to lead this settlement, Mark began discussing what they could do in the current situation. The discussion and preparation took some time. Some even feared that the lives of the 3 kidnapped women were getting into more danger as time passed by. However, Mark thought otherwise. The very likely reason for the three to be kidnapped was to lure him out along with General Perez. But, of course, General Perez must be their primary goal at the moment. Since even though Mark deliberately showed that he and his group were here, their whereabouts were still an unknown variable. They might be thinking that Mark would be drawn by the battle they were expecting to happen. But by the looks of it, they were not too sure of it to happen. That lapse, however, made it easier for Mark to infiltrate the place. It was a good thing Mark never showed his cards to anyone back in Bay City. The people there might know of his existence. However, there was barely anything they knew about his abilities. None of the current government would expect Mark could move through the smallest gaps by turning into a surge of mist. And now, he infiltrated the supposedly most secure place inside the safe zone without breaking a sweat. It was literally a piece of cake. Nonetheless, Mark was being careful. It was unexpected, but Mark could detect some powerful beings around the mansion. Although it would not be surprising if he detected someone who could be a member of CNC. However, it did not seem to be the case here. Since his primary goal in this infiltration was to save the three kidnapped girls, he wanted not to cause any commotion if possible. But another unexpected thing. Mark looked at the floor beneath him. He was standing right above where he was detecting Elsa, Angeling, and Paula. About 9 meters or so below him. It was odd. Who would have a basement that was 9 meters deep? But thinking about it, the mansion might have had some sort of bunker under it. It would not be surprising considering that this was a presidential mansion. This was a rather clever move by the government. No one would find the kidnapped girls if they were put in such a location. Unfortunately, it was kind of troublesome for Mark too. Now, he had to find where the entrance of that bunker could possibly be. Scratching his head, Mark turned into a surge of mist once more. There was no time to idle around. General Perez and the others were also waiting. Mark appeared in the most luxurious room inside the mansion. The first thing he did was to knock out the only person inside. It was a woman. The First Lady, huh? Mark said as he put the woman on the bed. He remembered the woman's face since he had seen her on the internet. However, he could not recall her name for some reason. He probably did not pay much attention. In any case, if the First Lady was here, it must be the bedroom of the president. It was one of the best locations to put the entrance of a bunker. And Mark was not mistaken. It took some time to search the room. But Mark found the electronically locked entrance under the bed. He found it suspicious that the bed seemed to be oddly high. As it appeared, the space under the bed was a crawl space to the entrance. And Mark did not have the passcode. Seriously, they planned this cautiously. Mark murmured. The entrance in front of him surely was not the sole entrance to the bunker. After all, there was no way they would bring the three kidnapped women all the way into the presidential suite. In any case, it was the entrance easiest to find. Turning into a surge of black mist, Mark pushed himself into the gaps of the keys of the panel into the wiring system of the entrance. In a second, Mark popped out from the keypad on the other side of the entrance. Turning back into his original form, Mark carefully traversed the hallway. He even took out the photokinesis mental crystal and covered himself with optical camouflage. Although it might alert some of the powerful beings if he was not careful, it was better than getting caught by the numerous cameras all over the hallway. This really is unexpected. Mark murmured while looking around. It feels like I'm exploring some sort of properly maintained vault. Mark was not wrong with this feeling. Contrary to the apocalyptic atmosphere outside, inside the bunker was the complete opposite. The walls and floor of the place were clean, lights were installed everywhere, and it was very secure. As Mark continued along, he noticed facilities necessary for survival underground. However, it was very empty. There were very few people inside. Most of them seemed to be scientists conducting research inside this place. This place is not something constructed after the world change, Mark said. It was impossible for this underground facility to be built in a month. It meant that this place managed to survive the over magnitude 10 earthquake during the fusion of dimensions. It was really surprising. But most of all, did our country have the budget to build something like this? The Philippines was a country with a whole lot of debt. Although Mark was unsure, he did not think that this country was capable of building something like this. With those thoughts, Mark avoided the security roaming the facility, along with the scientists that appeared to lack sleep. Soon, Mark stopped in front of another electronically locked door. The three women, Elsa, Angeline, and Paula, were inside. The three of them were still awake. Furthermore, they were not restrained in any way. However, there was no way for them to escape this place. They very likely tried tinkering with the keypad inside. However, it would be hard for them to guess the passcode. Using the gaps of the keys once more, Mark entered the room. The three women sure were surprised by the sudden black mist that seeped out of the keypad. Furthermore, the black mist transformed into a masked man in black clothing. But when the man removed his mask, Mark, bro, the three women exclaimed, seeing the familiar face. Shish. Mark hushed the three. Not too loud. The three understood and covered their mouths. They began glancing at the surveillance camera in the ceiling. Mark looked at it too. Well, Mark was already ahead, though. He already expected that there would be a camera inside. Thus, aside from the three women, the light in front of the camera was already manipulated by Mark. Using the photokinesis mental crystal, he caused some extreme white noise to block the camera from transmitting a clear video. This was way better than destroying the camera, since the person managing the camera would only think of this to be some sort of camera malfunction. It was the first time the three met Mark for a long time. However, the pleasantries would come later. For now, the most important was, "Mark, are you here to get us out?" Angeline fearlessly asked Mark in a whisper while looking in the opposite direction. "Yeah, I am," Mark replied. "The three of you are fine, right?" "Yeah, we're good," Paula answered. "Then, let's go. We don't have much time." Mark urged the three. "But bro." Elsa looked at Mark. "How are we going out?" Of course, they saw Mark enter using a strange method, but they could not do the same. "Just hold onto me tight," Mark said. The three girls could not understand what Mark wanted to do. However, there was no choice, really. Not to mention that Paula knew that Mark was not lying. Just holding onto him tightly would let them get out of this room. Day 203 to 12:11 a.m. Underground facility, central area, safe zone, Corregidor military settlement, island of Corregidor, province of Cavite. Getting the three women out of their holding cell, they began to carefully traverse its almost empty hallways. All Mark needed to do was retrace his steps back to the entrance he used. Still, he could not believe that such a facility existed under this settlement. Mark found the three on the third floor down, but it did not mean that this facility only had three. In fact, there seemed to be 7 floors, as Mark saw the number of keys from one of the elevators he passed by. In any case, no matter how unexpected things were, it was not Mark's problem. He only needed to bring Elsa, Angeline, and Paula out onto the rooftop of the presidential mansion. The three women, on the other hand, stuck closely behind Mark. The three of them were brave people, which made them look like they were fine. However, being kidnapped was still a traumatic experience. Now that someone came to save them, they followed his words without questions and by instinct. In fact, the minds of the three girls were filled with questions. One of those questions was the magic-like ability that Mark used, turning into a surge of mist to get in and out of the room. It was the first time they saw it, after all. Nonetheless, the three did not voice any questions. They knew the situation they were in and decided to stay silent. Mark was quite pleased with the demeanor of the three. He could not have another Spera following him around. That girl did not know how to hold back and questioned him a whole lot after seeing what Mark did to the base of the Powder Gang. As Mark led the three across the facility, he could not help but notice something strange. The guards patrolling the halls were getting lesser and lesser. Furthermore, "What are you two doing here?" Mark said after they climbed the second floor. Although Mark was still covering his group with optical camouflage, he was sure that the two people in front of him knew he was here, after all. "So, you're really here," Sir Mark. Nia smiled at the empty space in front of her. Both Nia and Alan, the two inheritors from Bay City, stood before Mark. It was not surprising that they could find Mark since there was a subtle connection between the inheritors of the Psycasts. It was even stronger around Mark, who had the Psi crystal. And these two were already inside the facility before Mark even infiltrated it. "Please, follow behind us," Alan said as he and his sister turned around. Mark was confused. Nonetheless, he followed the two since they did not have any ill will, and since Mark did not deactivate the optical camouflage. It looked like Nia and Alan were only having a stroll, or probably on a break. "Sir, Mark. You entered the facility through the presidential suite, correct?" Nia voiced out without looking behind her. They already found out that someone intruded after the First Lady's servant returned. However, they have yet to know that you managed to enter the facility without triggering the alarm on the keypad. Still, you should exit through another entrance. Without a doubt, Nia and Alan were here to help Mark. It was also very likely that Professor Isaac Company was behind the movements of these his foster children. After all, the professor was a close friend of General Perez. However, since he was a mere scientist, what Professor County could do in this situation was limited, especially considering he was inside the enemy's territory. In the least, they could assist Mark in saving the kidnapped victims. "I know you two had been in here since the start. How did you two know that the First Lady was knocked unconscious?" Mark asked. The guards had been informed of the possible infiltration. They are currently searching all over the place. Nia replied. As Nia said, Mark could detect the guards moving around the area underneath the presidential mansion. On the contrary, Nia and Alan brought Mark and the rest in a completely different direction to leave the facility. "Where does the entrance you two will bring us to lead to?" Mark asked another question. He was hoping that the entrance was somewhere near the compound of General Perez and his allies. "Unfortunately, we can't bring you too far. There are 7 locations for entrances to this facility, the same number of buildings around the central area of the safe zone. Where we can bring you is the entrance to the laboratory on the surface," Alan explained. From there, they made their way to the southwest area of the facility. As expected, the entrance here was heavily guarded. It was unlike the one in the presidential suite. That one was only used during emergencies. This entrance was used by employees and scientists, requiring more security. "M's Nia County and Mr. Allen Company," a guard greeted. "Already clocking out? Professor County is not with you?" "We are," Nia replied as she let the guard scan her identification card. "You guys know the professor. He's a research maniac. He'll probably continue researching until tomorrow afternoon." The guards could only shrug. Professor Isaac Company was pretty well known here, and his research antics were also understood by the people. With that, Nia and Alan passed through the entrance, arriving at a secured hall of the laboratory. The two then walked towards the entrance without saying a word. "All right. Thanks, you two. Anyway, you two better hide. Things will get chaotic from here." Those words entered the ears of Nia and Alan as they felt a gust of wind pass by. They felt Mark's presence dwindle as his group moved away from the two. The two understood what Mark said before he left. General Perez was now gathering his troops, and it was the same for the president. This night was expected to become bloody. Leaving Nia and Alan, Mark and the 3 women appeared on the rooftop of the laboratory. Being able to carry people with him using his shadow mist movement sure was handy. Unfortunately, he only had 2 hands he could use to grab. That was why when they appeared, Angeline was hugging Mark tightly from behind. "Bro. What are we going to do here?" Elsa asked, noticing the surroundings. It was understandable if Mark brought them somewhere secluded like a back alley before running away. However, to move them onto the rooftop of a 4-story building was the complete opposite of that. It was a dead end. "Wait a bit." Mark smiled as he turned his head towards the sky. Elsa, Angeline, and Paula did the same. It was then that they realized that something was floating, hidden among the clouds in the sky. They could not tell what it was, but they were sure that it was some sort of object. And that thing was what Mark was staring at. Mark stared at the mini-cube, floating among the clouds. He then began tapping one of his two rings. It was the ring from Bathala, the one with a pair that May was wearing. It was the signal. And receiving the signal, something appeared not far from the group, making the three women jump back in surprise. "Don't worry, it's your way out," Mark said. What appeared was Spera's portal. It was connected to the mini-cube, where the rest of Mark's group was waiting. The three women looked at Mark in askance. One after another, Mark was showing them weird things since earlier. "I don't have time to explain." Mark shrugged. "Mayor is on the other side of that portal. You three can ask her the questions. So you three should enter already." "Only us? What about you?" Paula asked, noticing that Mark did not intend on going with them. "Well, I have other things to do here," Mark answered. "Unfortunately, I can't have you three here to drag me down." The three women frowned at Mark's words. However, they could not deny it either. They were even kidnapped from their bedroom, unable to resist or even make a single sound. "You should be careful," Paula warned. "Those people that took us did not seem to be regular humans." "Okay, I'll be cautious," Mark replied. Those words from Paula implied that the people that took them were not just regular humans, evolvers, or mutators. The mutators and evolvers, despite their inhuman abilities, still counted as humans. What Paula meant was that those people were possibly beyond human. "Bro, be careful, and thank you," Elsa said before nervously entering the portal. "Follow us quickly, all right?" Angeline said as she jumped into the portal without fear. Lastly was Paula, who only nodded at Mark before entering the portal. And there, the portal closed, leaving Mark alone on the rooftop of the laboratory. Mark stood on the ledge of the rooftop. He looked around the place, specifically the central area of the safe zone. "I guess it's time." Mark shrugged. With a wave of his right hand, the psi crystal glowed. Several mental crystals appeared, floating and circling around his wrist. "Let's get the party started." Mark smiled. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. "President, the hostages are missing." The president's communication device on his desk sounded out, bringing a piece of surprising news. "What do you mean they are missing? What are you idiots doing?" The president roared onto the device. The news came all of a sudden after his wife was knocked out inside of their bedroom. It was understandable that the president was agitated. And to the president's question, the man on the other side of the communication device could not answer. The three kidnapped women just disappeared from their holding cell. The keypad was untampered, and not a single camera caught the three escaping. It was as if they vanished like ghosts after the camera in the holding cell malfunctioned. Even so, the man on the communication device tried to explain as much as he could to no avail. "Son of a b******. The president cursed before turning to the other people waiting in his office. "All of you, send some search parties. They shouldn't have gone too far." The president sure had the reason to be agitated. Those three women were their cards in case that things went against their favor. They could not let those women escape at all costs. But before the people inside the presidential office could reply, bam! Everyone in the settlement felt shaken. A surge of magical energy overflowed all over the place. The magical energy was too powerful that even regular humans could feel the threat instinctively. "Mr. President, look!" Major General Bautista exclaimed, pointing at the window of the office. The president, who was facing away from the window, turned immediately. Outside the window was a pillar of light, a beacon during the darkness of the night. Instead of feeling fear, however, President Deiroa was calm. "Manuel, mobilize our elite special forces. I have the feeling that this and the missing hostages are the works of that man." Tisk. Looks like the rumors aren't exaggerated, even a little bit. Asterisk 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 outside the walls, the night was also busy. The events from the other day had yet to die down, and the gangs were busy claiming the territory left by the Powder Gang in its destruction. However, the White Snake Gang was also busy with something else. "Do you know?" The general's daughter was kidnapped. It seems the culprits were the government? What? Are you serious? It's not just a rumor, right? Apparently, it's true. I heard it from the members of the White Snake Gang who is being backed by General Perez. Now that you mention it, those guys from the government don't like the general. Yeah, because the general cares for us, unlike those greedy bunch. How is General Perez, now? I hope he's all right. I probably won't be if my daughter got kidnapped. These kinds of conversations started to spread more or less 3 hours ago. It was the work of the members of the White Snake Gang, who were finally informed of the situation inside the walls. And, of course, they were also agitated, hearing that Elsa was among the kidnapped. If this was the case, they would do anything to take down the current government. And before midnight, the rumors spread all over the slums, whether it was the territory of the White Snake Gang or not. Even the other two remaining gangs temporarily stopped clashing with the White Snake Gang and took the Watchers' stance in the current situation. It was until everyone felt shaken for no reason, gazing at the pillar of light towering towards the sky. Day 203 to 12:42 a.m. Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. After the strange thunderstorm the other day, another unexplainable phenomenon engulfed the military settlement of Corregidor Island. The sleeping woke up and joined the awake. The people of the settlement all gazed in the direction of the central area of the safe zone. A pillar of light towered towards the sky, circled by ominous clouds darker than the night sky. Confusion. Fear. Most of the witnesses did not know what to feel about the situation. Their minds had yet to digest the scene before them. Was something dangerous happening inside the walls of the safe zone? If that was the case, should they run away? Even though this kind of thought flashed in the minds of the people, running away was the very last thing they would likely do. If they ran, where would they go? This settlement was the safest place they knew. The military struggled to traverse even a kilometer or two away from the settlement without incurring injuries, or worse, casualties. There was no way regular people could reach further than that. And thus, the confused people stood still. They watched the pillar of light, hoping that they would be fine in the end. Asterisk 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 inside the fortress walls of the safe zone. The situation was not much different than outside. In the northwest compound of the safe zone, General Perez stared at the pillar of light, recalling Mark's words a few hours ago during their planning. Asterisk asterisk. Gather your forces and follow the plan. Then, wait for my signal. Mark said. And what signal? General Perez asked. I haven't thought of it, actually, Mark answered. Don't worry. I'll make sure it's noticeable. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Seeing the pillar of light, General Perez could only shake his head. The signal sure was noticeable. In any case, it meant that his daughter was already in safe hands. Attention! General Perez stood on a podium, gathering the attention of his soldiers and allies. All of you had already been briefed of the outlines of the plan. Many of you should have questions, but now is not the right time to answer those. Some of those questions might even answer themselves later on. What I ask of you all was to follow my lead one more time. Don't worry, General, we're on your side. Yeah, down with those crocodiles. The soldiers voiced their unyielding support towards their general. Unlike those politicians that only showed themselves for pretense, they saw General Perez devote himself to the masses. And with the overwhelming support, General Perez could not help but feel touched. Men, ready. General Perez shouted out loud, mobilize. There, leading more than 500 soldiers, volunteers, and allies, General Perez marched out of his compound. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. With the forces of General Perez mobilizing, there was no way it would not reach the eyes and ears of the president. Mr. President. General Perez and his troops began to march. However, there's an issue. Major General Bautista reported. However, his expression seemed strange. Then we'll deal with it as planned. President Deroa ordered while still gazing at the pillar of light. Tell our troops to prepare for sortie. Perez should already know that his daughter is already safe and had nothing to fear anymore. Mr. President, there's something wrong with the situation. Major General Bautista repeated, making President Deroa turn around. Then what are you waiting for? Just say it. A senator present inside the office told the chief of staff in agitation. Not minding the impudent senator, Major General Bautista spoke. General Perez and his troops marched not towards here. From the report, they forced themselves through the north gate instead. The report caused a deafening silence in the room. The report had yet to sink into their minds. What did you say? President glared at Major General Bautista, wishing that he reported incorrectly. General Perez and his troops are marching out of the safe zone instead of going here. Major General Bautista repeated. The confusion ensued within the presidential office. No one could understand why General Perez was doing this. Were they planning to leave? Where would they go in this situation? Continue monitoring General Perez. President Deroa said with a frown. How about our elite special forces? They are already en route, Mr. President. They already found the target standing on the rooftop of the laboratory. They are amidst securing the perimeter before initiating the attack. They are also evacuating the personnel around the perimeter. Major General Deroa reported. So, is it really the target? The President asked. Apparently, yes. Major General Bautista replied. It seemed to be the very same person the scouts saw within the base of the White Snake Gang the other day. At this point, the radio on Major General's belt sounded. Mr. President, our elites are ready to sortie. Then, begin. Make sure to capture him alive. Having a torn limb or two should suffice. If not possible, take all of it. Yes, Mr. President. Asterisk 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 on the roof of the laboratory, at the center of the flood of torrential magical energy, Mark stood calmly. Mark stared at the floating crystal in front of him. Its glow began to dim. As expected of the magical ability of the King of Merpeople, its released energy alone can affect a large region. That was right. The crystal that began to dim was the Stormcaller mental crystal, while Mark used the Photokinesis mental crystal to create the Pillar of Light. That was it. Instead, the raging magical energy in the surroundings was all the Stormcaller mental crystal. Mark released the energy without manipulating it to summon a storm. Yet, its energy alone affected the weather and called upon the swirling dark clouds and in the sky. Plop. Tap. 1 drop, 2 drops. One after another, raindrops began to fall. The start of the rain marked the last bit of energy from the crystal to be drained. The Stormcaller mental crystal fell on Mark's palm. Its glow was all gone and would probably need a day or two to fully recharge. It did not matter, however. In terms of fighting, it had fewer uses. However, the Stormcaller mental crystal was good at setting the stage. Even though Mark did not plan for it, a rainy stage sure was more advantageous for him. Especially since the place he stood at was now surrounded. There's around 100, Mark murmured. They don't seem like regular soldiers. Mark monitored the movements of the enemies as they stealthily surrounded him. They moved efficiently, and there was barely any time wasted as they proceeded to take their positions. 20 snipers, 30 ready for infiltration, and aside from 10, the rest are ground troops. All of them are fully equipped. Mark closed his eyes. Those 10, they are not just some regular humans. Mark knew these people since General Perez explained it to him before. The elite special forces. However, they were not just soldiers trained to be dispatched on elite missions. They were mainly in charge of paranormal anomalies in the country. They were the aces of this country against problems that could not be solved by normal means. TSST, overshadowed by the sound of the rain, muffled gunfire could be barely heard. Mark was suddenly thrown to the floor. His right leg was pierced by a bullet which caused him to fall violently. However, it was not just one shot. Following the first one, several more gunshots occurred. All the 9 remaining snipers took their shots at Mark, targeting his limbs. Mark lay on the wet rooftop, blood spilled onto the floor. With his fall, the Pillar of Light vanished. He then stopped moving. No movements were observed on Mark, causing the soldiers to be bewildered. 5 shadowy figures jumped from roof to roof before arriving at the laboratory's rooftop to check on their target. "Is it done? I thought he's someone powerful." A woman's voice could be heard as one of the 5 figures spoke. "Don't let your guard down," a man warned the woman. The 5 cautiously approached Mark. One of them began using his assault rifle to nudge their unmoving target. "Is he dead?" "We're doomed if he is," the same woman asked. "He's not. I can sense his heartbeat. Get away from him." One of the 5 seemed to have keener senses than the rest. He could tell that Mark's heart was still beating without getting close. However, he noticed that the rate of the heartbeat of their target was not the same for an unconscious or injured person. The man warned the other 4, but it was too late. Bam! Bam! Boom! Bam! Out of the 5, only the man with keen senses remained standing. As he detected the anomaly first, he managed to jump away. The other 4, each of them were hit by a sudden attack. One became embedded to the floor, one was thrown off the rooftop, the other blown to the edge of the roof, while the last one was flung away to another building. *T. The last man cursed. They were caught off guard. This was the first time they encountered someone that managed to stay alive and conscious after getting hit by 10 50 caliber sniper rifles, not to mention using their special bullets. TCH. Why the hell did it hurt this much? Mark said as he stood up. The holes left by bullets on his limbs began to heal rapidly. Even the bullets stuck inside his arms and legs after hitting his bones were pushed out. "So, this is why," Mark said, catching one of the bullets from his arm. It was a silver bullet, not to mention a blessed one. A bullet against demons. Mark wondered if these guys knew that he was a demon. However, that was impossible. He never revealed such information to anyone from outside his base after all. It may be their standard bullets. As Mark wondered, the 2 he attacked that were still on the roof stood up. "You guys all right?" the man with keen senses asked his comrades. "I'm fine, but damn, that hurts. My arm got dislocated. If it's others, they're dead by now." One soldier, the noisy woman, replied with her dangling arm. The other did not bother answering. Instead, he stared warily at Mark, who baited them. However, the dislocated arm of the woman did not stay that way as she twisted her arm back into place before stretching it. Quite a resilient bunch. Mark shrugged. What the woman said was right. The attacks he did would probably punch a hole through the chest of a regular human. Yet, the 4 that Mark managed to attack did not sustain any heavy injury at all. "I didn't expect that the country had the kind of people like you all." Mark spoke to the 3 in front of him. "Don't worry, we didn't expect you to be fine after that, either." The woman replied to Mark. "Stop talking to him. We're here to do our job." The man with keen sense reprimanded the woman. "Shush." Suddenly, the sound of wind being torn apart entered Mark's ears. He took a step back, and the guy thrown to another building flew past his initial position. The speed was very fast, probably as fast as a bullet. It was literally a human-sized bullet. Unfortunately, bam! Mark slammed his palm on the back of the man before he whizzed past him. Although Mark was not targeting their vitals, he was holding back. GAHACK. The man spurted blood from his mouth as he was slammed to the floor. Due to the strength of Mark's attack, the floor gave way, creating a huge hole 2 floors below. "How rude. We're still talking," Mark said as he gazed at the hole. "Anyway, that's one down." This time, Mark was sure that the man was incapacitated, at least till the end of the battle. The 3 soldiers in front of Mark began concentrating on him. They did not say anything about the plight of their comrade that fell down the hole. Instead, their attention was all on Mark. Suddenly, "Dodge!" Another woman's voice could be heard. As her voice entered the ears of the 3 soldiers in front of Mark, they jumped off the roof. Boom! All of a sudden, the entire rooftop was engulfed in flames. Unexpectedly, it was not explosives. The woman that shouted just now conjured flames out of nowhere and made it explode. Day 203 to 1:01 a.m., North Military Outpost, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. About half a kilometer north of the northern gates of the slums, a military outpost was located. This outpost was the first line of defense the Corregidor military settlement had against the enemies coming from up north. Considering that the island of Corregidor was now and only connected to the southern part of Mariveles, Baton, this installment of defenses was rather good. And this outpost was one of the reasons the guards of the gates of the slums could keep themselves lax. 1 hour past midnight, the soldiers stationed at the outpost kept their concentration up high. Danger could come at any time, and staying here in the front line was far different than being in the settlement. Different from most days, however. You guys think things will be fine? A soldier on watch spoke to his partner. About the current situation in the settlement? Don't ask me. I don't really do well with politics and stuff. The other soldier replied. The world has ended, and the guys up there are still as greedy as F***ck. If you ask me, I'd rather follow General Perez. He really cares about the people, like us, unlike those who only wanted to stuff their pockets with everything they wanted. Those guys only see us as tools at their disposal. The first soldier sighed. Not like we can do anything. We have our families to feed and protect, so we can't go against the leaders easily. At least, we're here. We don't have to join the mess inside the settlement. I would rather not fight with General Perez either. The second soldier shrugged. Yes, the soldiers in this outpost were lucky did not get dragged into the scuffle between the current government and General Perez's camp. In the end, whether who won, the soldiers following the government's orders were the ones to suffer. At least, those here in the outpost only needed to continue their usual work. I wonder what's with that pillar of light, though, the first soldier said, turning his head towards the pillar of light coming from the settlement. I wish they would at least inform us of what is happening there. We can't expect that kind of privilege, we're just at the bottom. The second soldier said, also curious about the events there. But then, shish. The second soldier closed his mouth and signaled to his partner. Receiving the signal, the first soldier turned serious as he turned towards the northern direction. URRGGG. Gargle. Asterisk a plethora of sounds entered the ears of the two. However, none of the sounds sounded pleasant to the ear. Instead, it began to instill horror towards the two. Holy sh**t. The first soldier muttered in shock. In front of them was a clearing devoid of trees or plants. It was to ensure that they would see anything approaching before they got too close to the outpost. And using solar panels, they had enough electricity to have a couple of spotlights to light up the clearing. What they would commonly see passing by in this area was scavengers and soldiers on a mission. There would be 1 or 2 dangerous entities from time to time, but not too many as the military continuously sent squads to do clearing missions. And that was why the first soldier on lookout could only curse as fear overwhelmed him. What are you standing frozen for? Sound the alarm. The second soldier said as he picked up his gun. Bang, bang. Clang, 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 clang. With the first soldier snapping out of his fear, the alarm bell on the watchtower sounded. The second soldier started shooting. His expression was in utter seriousness. Why? Coming out of the forest border, numerous, infected, came flooding into the clearing. The infected ran, wildly rushing towards the direction of the outpost. Since the alarm sounded off, the other soldiers in the outpost, asleep or not, immediately caught onto the situation. Equipping themselves with guns and explosives, they went to the defense lines as soon as possible. But even with the 50 soldiers stationed at this outpost, there was no way for them to fight toe-to-toe with the number of infected in front of them. **T. Contact the headquarters. Call for backup. The outpost commander shouted, knowing that their firepower was not enough. All they could do here was delay the infected as much as possible, even if the backup was to arrive. But before the soldiers could even see the good percentage of the horde in front of them, Rua Arr. The soldiers stood frozen as their faces raised up high. Asterisk 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 day 203 to 107 a.m. Presidential Office, Presidential Mansion, Central Area, Safe Zone, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. What did you say? President De Roa shouted at that communication device on his table. Mr. President, the northern outpost is now confronting an undeterminable number of infected. They urgently needed backup, sir. Damn it. Why now? President De Roa shouted in anger, making all the people inside his office silent. Of all times such an event could possibly happen, it happened now. Aside from the soldiers in the outposts and those stationed at the gates of the settlement, all the remaining soldiers were deployed at the central area. They needed the firepower to overwhelm General Perez and his allies, especially since the general had many mutators in his camp. Now, the president should decide. Would he keep the soldiers around him in case that General Perez and his camp attacked? Or would he prioritize the settlement over his and his allies' safety? President De Roa and his allies were now stuck between a rock and a hard place. But before they could arrive at any decision, Mr. President, this is an emergency. Our soldiers on the north outpost opted to abandon their post. They were now regrouping to make another defense line near the northern gates. The communication device suddenly sounded with an urgent message. What? President De Roa roared. What the hell are they doing? 2 Behemoth-class infected were witnessed among the horde. The outpost is ill-equipped against such monstrosities. Hearing the reply from the headquarters, President De Roa slumped on his chair. Behemoth-class infected. Different from infected types, it was the general term they gave for infected, over a certain size, whether it be length or height. They were rare even among the infected in the current times. But no matter how rare they were, they existed. 7 meters. That was the shortest measurement of a behemoth-class infected could have. That size of the enemy would need at least 2 or 3 soldier companies to kill. All of them needed to be armed to teeth with guns and explosives. And even after the threat was subdued, the casualties would be enormous. Following the president's silence, Major General Bautista inquired on the communicator. He did not care whether the president permitted it or not. The whole settlement was currently facing a crisis. This is the chief of staff. What size did the behemoth-class infected have, and what type? The larger one is a humanoid behemoth-class infected, around 9 meters in height. It had a stone-like body and is presumed to be a tank-type infected. The smaller one is a beast behemoth-class infected, 7 meters in height with undetermined length. Its type is also undetermined as of yet. The reports said that it seemed to be supposedly quadruped, but it only had its front limbs as it dragged its rear across the ground. One is a tank type, and the other did not have hind legs. Those two would take some time before reaching the settlement. Major General Bautista said before turning to the president. Mr. President, you have yet to choose, but I don't think I'll be hearing it. I'm going. Major General Bautista then turned around, intending to leave the office. Unlike the chief of staff, the rest of the people here were the same as the president, undecided. Bautista, President De Roa exclaimed. However, the chief of staff had no intention to listen any longer. But just as the chief of staff was about to hold the door's handle, the communication device sounded. Mr. President, Major General, we received some updates from our soldiers that retreated from the outpost. This time, Major General Bautista could not help but turn around to listen. General Perez sent soldiers to aid the retreating soldiers. They were currently establishing a defensive line outside the northern gate of the slums. The refugees in the northern slums were being evacuated by the White Snake Gang into the emergency shelter. The atmosphere in the presidential office was frozen still. That Perez bastard knew this will happen? Did he cause this? President De Roa said. It was clear that he stopped thinking straight. Call the infected to attack? Major General Bautista asked, now clearly having no respect in his tone. You think it's possible? Forget it. I'm not hearing your answer. I'm done with you greedy F***CKS. Slam. Major General Bautista slammed the door on the president and his allies. As the chief of staff left, the only ones left behind were mostly politicians, except for a few people who were rich businessmen back then. "Don't you think it's a good opportunity for us, Mr. President?" one of the businessmen spoke. "If General Perez fought those infected with his allies, they would incur casualties even if they won. Once the situation outside is dealt with, we will have the advantage." "Mr. Shao is right," a younger senator chimed in. "We're talking about a behemoth-class infected, and it's not just a single one. You two are smart, but you surely lacked political experience." President Daroa shook his head in dismay. It seemed Major General Bautista's outburst woke him up from his delusion. Whether they did cause the horde to come or not, with Perez charging first into the front line, the base for propaganda had been concretely established. Propaganda that is not to our favor. President Daroa then stood up, looking outside the window facing the laboratory's rooftop covered in flames. "It's not our loss yet. If they managed to capture the target, even if they lost to General Perez, they would have enough ability to survive if they became mutators. They could just escape and live off somewhere else." Day 203 to 103 AM. Rooftop, laboratory, central area, safe zone, Corregidor military settlement, island of Corregidor, province of Cavite. "Did it do it?" the noisy woman among the elite special forces said as she landed on the roof of the adjacent building with her allies. Flames surged on the rooftop of the laboratory. Even they, who had stronger bodies than regular people, would not be able to withstand such high-temperature flames. "Unfortunately, you shouldn't ask questions like that. You're just jinxing yourself." The noisy woman felt goosebumps. The voice came from behind her. Clack. The woman did not panic, however. Taking out her pistol from its holster, she turned around with a kick. Mark agilely avoided the kick with a single step back. However, as the kick missed, the woman followed with several gunshots, before she retreated with a few jumps backward. With that single exchange, the three soldiers, now four as the one that fell off the building joined them. The four soldiers that initially checked on Mark regrouped. Another woman stood on the roof of a higher building, and another four elite soldiers were waiting to strike within the shadows. They were ready to continue the fight with their target, unexpectedly. It already started, huh? Mark was not paying attention to the elite soldiers as he faced the north direction. A general whose daughter was kidnapped by the country's president and his allies came to aid and protect the populace despite his daughter still missing. Such a valiant story. Who wouldn't want such a person to become their leader instead? Mark smirked. "What are you smiling for?" Boom! A shout entered Mark's ear before it was overshadowed by an explosion. One shouted to get his attention while another threw a grenade at him. These elite soldiers sure were well coordinated. "Unfortunately. Seriously. You guys are lucky. General Perez asked me to not kill any of you soldiers." The target's voice was heard by the soldiers, not from within the explosions, however. All of them looked up. There, Mark, with his 3 pairs of wings, flew. Looking down on the country's finest soldiers, he spoke. "Well, I only need to keep your attention for some time. Now, I'm done playing." With those words, Mark's eyes glowed. The right eye glowed red and the other with violet. All of a sudden, the pressure on every human in the vicinity heightened. Elite forces they might be. In the end, they were just human.